So far in our study of economics, we've been looking at transactions that have two parties involved. So we have a group that produces goods and services at some cost. And then we have another group that consumes these goods and services for some benefits. But what if we had a third party? An unknown third party that wasn't involved in production or consumption, but was somehow affected by the transaction anyway. And so in economics, we have a term for this, and that term is externality. Externality. So an externality is an external effect, a side effect on a third party not involved in the transaction. And we generally divide externalities into two categories: positive externalities and negative externalities. So the explanations for these are quite intuitive. So positive externalities involve someone other than the consumer or producer benefiting from the transaction. Meanwhile, negative externalities involve someone other than the consumer or producer paying some cost because of the transaction. It would help to look at an example, at this point. Let's start with positive externalities, and one really concrete example that I think would help would be vaccines. So if you get a vaccine for, the flu or vampirism, hepatitis, whatever, you as an individual receive some personal benefits. So you have immunity to that disease. But there are also benefits that affect the community at large. So if almost everyone is vaccinated, then it becomes much more difficult for the disease to spread. In economics, we actually have terms to refer to these different types of benefits. So the first, let's mix up the color a bit, is marginal private benefit. And then the other term, marginal social benefit. So what do these mean exactly? Well, remember that in economics, marginal means, let's try something lighter, means additional. So it is the benefit received by the consumer, and I emphasize only the consumer, for consuming an additional unit of a good or service. Meanwhile, the marginal social benefit refers to the benefit received by society as a whole because of the consumption of this good or service. So marginal social benefit is a much broader category, so MSB. It includes both the marginal private benefit that we just discussed and also any external benefits that the consumer might not get, but that someone else could benefit from. So that means that the marginal social benefit is always greater. All well and good, but how do we represent this information visually? How do we draw a diagram? So let's begin by just setting up our axes. My economics teacher always used to tell me that you should make your graphs as big as possible, about the size of your hand. I know there's some variability in hand size, but I think that's generally good advice. And remember, let's just label them for clarity. So this is price, this is quantity. Now, everything we've been talking about so far involving positive externalities has only really involved consumption and hasn't been involved with the production side of things. So that means we have our standard supply curve. Now, consumption, meanwhile, is a bit more complicated. So we just talked about how we broke down benefits, right, into marginal private benefits and marginal social benefits. So here we're going to have two downward sloping curves. So this one we'll call marginal private benefits, and then this one will be marginal social benefits. Now, as we can see, the marginal social benefit is greater at every interval, and we can see that this gap in between right here represents all the external benefits that the consumer themselves doesn't receive, but that benefit society as a whole. I hope that this was helpful. In the next video, we'll perform a similar analysis, but this time we'll look at negative externalities.